Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Michelle Pecson and I will give the summary of the five theories that were tackled in our subject, which is EDUC 123. So the five stages that I will be talking about are Freud's psychoanalytic theory, Piaget's stages of cognitive development, Erikson's psychosocial theory of development, Kohlberg's stages of moral development, and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. The proponent of this study is Sigmund Freud. He was born in 1856 and died in 1939. He is the father of psychoanalysis, a branch of psychology that focuses on treating mental illness by analyzing various stages of growth and types of human behavior. He was a Viennese doctor who came to believe that the way parents dealt with children's basic sexual and aggressive desires would determine how their personalities develop and whether or not they would end up well adjusted as adults. He described children as going through multiple stages of sexual development, which he labeled oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Each of the psychosexual stages has conflict that are part of the process of growth wherein they must be conquered in order to move forward from another stage. To explain the role of conflict, Freud suggested the analogy of military troops on the march. As the troops advance, they are met by opposition or conflict. If they are highly successful in winning the battle or resolving the conflict, then most of the troops, which represents the libido, will be able to move on to the next battle or stage. But the greater the difficulty encountered at any particular point, the greater the need for troops to remain behind to fight, and thus the fewer that will be able to go on the next confrontation. Some people do not seem to be able to leave one stage and proceed on to the next. Some reasons for this are frustration and overindulgence. Frustration occurs when the needs are not met. Next reason for this is overindulgence. There is a possibility that the person's needs may have been so well satisfied that he or she is reluctant to leave the psychological benefits of a particular stage. Both frustration and overindulgence, or any combination of the two, may lead to what psychoanalysts call fixation at a particular psychosexual stage. It refers to the theoretical notion that a portion of the individual's libido has been permanently invested in a particular stage of his development. So now I will talk about oral stage, anal stage, phallic stage, latency stage, and genital stage. So, in the first stage of personality development, which is the oral stage, it starts from birth to 1 year. The libido is centered in a baby's mouth. It gets much satisfaction from putting all sorts of things in its mouth to satisfy the libido, and thus its id demands, which at this stage in life are oral or mouth oriented, such as sucking, biting, and breastfeeding. Freud said oral stimulation could lead to an oral fixation in later life. We see oral personalities all around us, such as smokers, nail biters, finger chewers, and thumb suckers. Oral personalities engage in such oral behaviors, particularly when under stress. After the oral stage, the next stage is anal stage. The age range is from 1 to 3 years. During the anal stage, Freud believed that the primary focus of the libido was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. The major conflicts at this stage is toilet training. The child has to learn to control their bodily needs. Developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment and independence. In this stage, the toddlers experience conflict over toilet training. If fixated, it results to being anal retentive or holding everything in, being obsessive about neatness and cleanliness, or anal expulsive, being messy and disorganized. The phallic stage, the age range is from 3 to 6 years. The erogenous zones are the genitals. The child becomes aware of anatomical sex differences. This is also the stage in which the process of identification, which involves the child adopting the characteristics of the same sex parent, is seen. It sets in motion the conflict between erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear, which Freud called the Oedipus complex in boys and the Electra complex in girls. The latency stage occurs at approximately between 6 years of age until puberty. At this stage, the child represses all interest in sexuality and develops social and intellectual skills. No further psychosexual development takes place during this stage because latent means hidden, the libido is dormant, and there is no fixation. Genital stage is the last stage of Freud's psychosexual theory of personality development, and it begins in puberty to adult. Sexual instinct is directed to heterosexual pleasure rather than self-pleasure like during the phallic stage. For Freud, the proper outlet of the sexual instinct in adults was through heterosexual intercourse. Fixation and conflicts may prevent this, with the consequence that sexual perversions may develop. For example, fixation at the oral stage may result in a person gaining sexual pleasure primarily from kissing and oral sex rather than sexual intercourse. Psychoanalysis emphasizes unconscious motivation. Main cause of behavior lies buried in the unconscious mind. It is both an approach to therapy and a theory of personality. Id is part of the unconscious mind. It contains our needs, drives, instincts, and repressed materials. It is our pleasure principle. Ego is part of the conscious mind, or in touch with reality. It strives to balance or meet the needs of the id and the superego in socially acceptable ways. It is our reality principle. The superego is the ethical component of the personality, and it provides the moral standards by which the ego operates. The superego's criticisms, prohibitions, and inhibitions form a person's conscience, and its positive aspirations and ideals represent one's idealized self-image or ego ideal. It counteracts the socially undesirable impulses of the id. It is our moral principle. This approach assumes behavior is determined by relatively stable traits, which are the fundamental units of one's personality. Traits predispose one to act in a certain way. Regardless of the situation, this means that traits should remain consistent across situations and over time, but may vary between individuals. John Piaget was a Swiss psychologist known for his work on child development. His theory of cognitive development explains how a child constructs a mental model of the world. He disagreed with the idea that intelligence was a fixed trait and regarded cognitive development as a process which occurs due to biological maturation and interaction with the environment. Cognitive development has four stages. The first stage is sensory motor stage. The second one is pre-operational stage. The third stage is concrete operational stage. And lastly, the fourth stage is formal operational stage. The first stage of cognitive development is sensory motor stage. It starts from birth to 2 years. Infants start to build an understanding of the world through their senses by touching, grasping, watching, and listening. In this stage, infants develop object permanence. Object permanence is the ability of the child to know that an object still exists even when out of sight. This ability is attained in the sensory motor stage. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. It starts from 2 to 7 years. Children develop language and abstract thought. Children begin to use symbolic play or playing pretend, drawing pictures, and talking about things that happened in the past. This stage is highlighted by the following. First is symbolic function. Next is egocentrism or self-centered. The third one is centration. The fourth one is irreversibility. And the last one is animism. Symbolic function refers to when young child gains the ability to represent mentally an object that is not present. while egocentrism is the inability to distinguish between one's own and another's view. Centration is when a child will become completely fixed on one point, not allowing them to see the wider picture. For example, focusing only on the height of the container rather than both the height and width when determining what has the biggest volume. Irreversibility. It is when the pre-operational children still have the inability to reverse their thinking. They can understand that 2 plus 3 is 5 but cannot understand 5 minus 3 is 2. Next is animism. This is the tendency of children to attribute human-like traits or characteristics to inanimate objects. Stage 3, the concrete operational stage. This stage is characterized by the ability of the child to think logically but only in terms of concrete objects. This covers approximately the ages between 8 to 11 years or the elementary school years. The concrete operational stage is marked by the following: decentering, reversibility, conservation, seriation. Decentering refers to the ability of the child to perceive the different features of objects and situations. They are no longer focused or limited to one aspect or dimension. This allows the child to be more logical when dealing with concrete objects and situations. Reversibility is the stage. During this stage of concrete operations, the child can now follow that certain operation cannot be reversed, while conservation refers to the ability to know that certain properties of objects like numbers, mass, volume, or area do not change even if there is a change in appearance. Seriation, on the other hand, refers to the ability to order or arrange things in a series based on one dimension, such as weight, volume, or size. Stage 4, formal operational stage. This is the final stage. It covers the ages between 12 and 15 years. In this stage, thinking becomes more logical. They can now solve in general ideas or specific problems and can educated guess. This stage is characterized by the following. First is hypothetical reasoning, second, analogical reasoning, and third is deductive reasoning. Hypothetical reasoning is the ability to come up with different hypotheses about a problem and weigh data to make judgment. Analogical reasoning refers to the ability to perceive the relationship in one instance and then use that relationship to narrow down possible answers in another similar situation or problem. And lastly, deductive reasoning is the ability to think logically by applying a general rule to a particular instance or situation. The next theory is Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory of development. The proponent of this theory is Erik Hamburger Erikson. He is the father of psychosocial development. He is an Austrian psychoanalyst, and he believed that humans have to resolve different conflicts as they progress through each stage of development in the life cycle. Erikson's theory consists of 8 stages of development. Each stage is characterized by a different conflict that must be resolved by the individual. If a person is unable to resolve a conflict at a particular stage, they will be confronted and struggle with it later in life. This theory is the best known theory of personality and development. Psychosocial. Psycho, relating to the mind, brain, personality, etc., and social, which means the external relationships and environment. The theory is a basis for broad and complex discussion and analysis of personality and behavior, and also facilitating personality development of self and others. If a stage is managed well, we carry away a certain virtue or psychosocial strength which will help us through the rest of the stages of our lives. If not, we develop malignancy and maladaptation. Malignancy refers to the involvement of too little or the positive and too much of the negative aspects of the task, such as a person who can trust others. Maladaptation is not quite as bad and involves too much of the positive and too little of the negative, such as persons who trust too much. Stage 1: Trust versus mistrust. This stage begins at birth, continues to approximately 18 months of age. During this stage, the infant is uncertain about the world in which they live and looks towards their primary caregiver for stability and consistency of care. Maladaptation or malignancy is sensory maladjustment, and the virtue here is hope. Stage 2: Autonomy versus shame and doubt. This stage occurs between the ages of 18 months to approximately 3 years. According to Erickson, children at this stage are focused on developing a sense of personal control over physical skills and a sense of independence. Malignancy or maladaptations are impulsiveness and compulsiveness. The virtue here is willpower. Stage 3: Initiative versus guilt. During the initiative versus guilt stage, children assert themselves more frequently. These are particularly lively, rapid developing years in a child's life. According to B. 1992, it is a time of vigor, of action, and of behaviors that parents may see as aggressive. Maladaptation or malignancy are ruthlessness and inhibition. The virtue here is courage. Stage 4: Industry versus inferiority. It occurs during childhood between the ages of 5 and 12. Children are at the stage where they will be learning to read and write, to do sums, to do things on their own. Teachers begin to take an important role in the child's life as they teach the child specific skills. Maladaptation or malignancy, narrow virtuosity and inertia. The virtue here is competency. Stage 5: Identity versus role confusion. It occurs during adolescence, from about 12 to 18 years. During this stage, adolescents search for a sense of self and personal identity through an intense exploration of personal values, beliefs, and goals. Maladaptation or malignancy, fanaticism and repudiation. Virtue, fidelity. Stage 6: Intimacy versus isolation. This stage takes place during young adulthood between the ages of approximately 18 to 40 years. During this period, the major conflict centers on forming intimate, loving relationships with other people. Maladaptation or malignancy, promiscuity and exclusion. Virtue, love. Stage 7: Generativity versus stagnation. This stage takes place during middle adulthood, ages 40 to 65 years. Generativity refers to making your mark on the world through creating or nurturing things that will outlast an individual, while stagnation refers to being stagnant or being stuck. Maladaptation or malignancy, overextension and rejectivity. The virtue here is care. Stage 8: Ego integrity versus despair. This stage is the final stage of Erik Erikson's theory. This stage begins at approximately age 65 and ends at death. It is during this time that we contemplate our accomplishments and can develop integrity if we see ourselves as leading a successful life. Maladaptation or malignancy, presumption and disdain. The virtue here is wisdom. The next theory is Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Lawrence Kohlberg was for many years a professor at Harvard University. He became famous for his work there beginning in the early 1970s. He started as a developmental psychologist and then moved to the field of moral education. He was particularly well known for his theory of moral development, which he popularized through research studies conducted at Harvard Center for Moral Education. His theory of moral development was dependent on the thinking of the Swiss psychologist John Piaget and the American philosopher John Dewey. Kohlberg believed and was able to demonstrate through studies that people progress in their moral reasoning through a series of stages. He believed that there were 6 identifiable stages which could be more generally classified into 3 levels. He used Piaget's storytelling technique to tell people stories involving moral dilemmas. One of the best-known stories of Kohlberg, 1958, concerns a man called Haynes who lived somewhere in Europe. The 3 levels of moral development. Level 1 is pre-conventional morality. There are 2 stages under this level. Stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation. Stage 2, individualism and exchange. Level 2, conventional morality. There are also two stages under this. Stage 3, good interpersonal relationships. Stage 4, maintaining the social order. Level 3, post-conventional morality. There are also two stages under this, which is the stage 5, social contract and individual rights, and stage 6, universal principles. The first level, pre-conventional morality, is generally found at the elementary school level. In the first stage of this level, people behave according to socially acceptable norms because they are told to do so by some authority or figure. Examples of this authority are parents or teacher. Disobedience is compelled by the threat or application of punishment. The second stage of this level is characterized by a view that right behavior means acting in one's own best interest. The second level, which is conventional morality, is generally found in society, hence the name conventional. The first stage of this level, stage 3, is characterized by an attitude which seeks to do what will gain the approval of others, while the second stage, stage 4, is one oriented to abiding by the law and responding to the obligations of duty. The third level, which is post-conventional morality, is one that Coleridge felt is not reached by the majority of adults. Its first stage, stage 5, is an understanding of social mutuality and a genuine interest in the welfare of others. The last stage, stage 6, is based on respect for universal principle and the demands of individual conscience. While Coleridge always believed in the existence of stage 6 and had some nominees for it, he could never get enough subject to define it, much less observe their longitudinal movement to it. Coleridge believed that individuals could only progress through these stages one stage at a time, that is, they could not jump stages. The last theory is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. Lev Vygotsky is known as the Mozart of psychology. He was born in Western Russia on November 5, 1986. His work began when he was studying learning and development to improve his own teaching. He wrote on language, thought, psychology of art, learning and development, and educating students with special needs. Sociocultural theory of development. Crucial influence that social interactions and language embedded within a cultural context have on cognitive development. Vygotsky emphasized that effective learning happens through participation in social activities. Parents, teachers, and other adults in the learner's environment all contribute to the process. Peers, on the other hand, cooperate and collaborate and enrich the learning experience. Language can be viewed as a verbal expression of culture. Every culture has the words it needs for its lifestyle. It opens the door for learners to acquire knowledge that others already have. Language can be viewed as a verb. The zone of proximal development are the things the child can do with a bit of help or scaffolding, such as when prompted with leading questions or watching an example setter. This is the space where learning and growth occur. Scaffolding refers to the support or assistance that lets the child accomplish a task he or she cannot accomplish independently. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory asserts that learning is an essential social process in which the support of parents, caregivers, peers, and the wider society and culture plays a crucial role in the development of higher psychological functions. And that is all for the summary of the five theories. Thank you for listening.